Welcome back, art viewers, art heads. It's James Kalm. Your half-assed reporter, the guy on the bike. And today we're down here on Rivington Street on the Lower East Side. And this is the beginning of the 2017 gallery season. We're going to run in here to Betty Cunningham / TIBOR De Nagyi gallery. And we're going to look at an exhibition by Larry Rivers titled Reappropriation.
Yeah, me too.
I think this is going to be an interesting show in a lot of ways. I have been a fan of Larry probably about as long as I've been a painter. And I was lucky enough to actually get a chance to meet Larry, and I worked with him restoring this is a classic painting assemblage sculptural piece from the late 60s. Well, I was a young painter in Idaho working in my mother's garage, and I happened to pick up a poster of a Larry Rivers painting titled Lion for the Dreyfus Fund, and it was like a talisman for me, and I guess I would say probably influenced my artistic vision, my aesthetic. This is titled Syndicates of the Drapery Guild as Dutch Masters. This is 1978-79 acrylic on canvas and board, 98 by 69 by 5.5. I would say that this is one of Larry's iconic images. Well, one of the things that I think we'll talk about this evening is the fact that Larry was, in a lot of ways, a precursor to pop art, and he came along right at the tail end of Abstract Expressionism. If you're interested, you can pick up his wonderful memoir called What Did I Do? This is titled Vacuum Form Friendship of America and France, 1972. 66 by 13 by 25 inches. Well, I think the thing that I liked about Larry was that he brought the idea of draftsmanship, being able to draw a figure, kind of graphic skills back into fashion, and he was part of a whole movement that was reacting against abstract expressionism. This piece is titled Three Camels, 1962, oil and charcoal on canvas. And again, we've got a reference to pop culture and a commercial product here. I don't know how many versions of the Camel cigarette pack he did, but probably dozens. This is good. So he's flipped the camel. He's got a different species of camel here. Larry was such a interesting guy, tricky guy. There are probably a lot of things I shouldn't talk about. This is another classic early Larry. This is Summer Nude, Miss New Jersey 3 from 1960. And you can see where he's, in certain ways, there would be a relationship between this work and what people like Richard Diebenkorn and maybe some of the other Bay Area figurative painters are doing. But Larry always wanted to keep his hand in there, his drawing hand, his line, and he was always using a lot of charcoal and graphite on top of these paintings. This is titled Bill and Elaine de Kooning and Woman 1, 1997. Oil and canvas on sculpted foam board. Well, this was done with a friend of mine, a wonderful artist in his own right named Kylie Jenkins. Now, I was introduced to Larry by another artist named Rainer Gross, who was his assistant for many years back in the late 70s, early 80s. And I know that Kylie also worked with him extensively for probably the last 10 or 12 years of his life. Kylie, unfortunately, died young as well. Well, this is based on a famous, I think it's a Hans Naumuth portrait of Bill and Elaine. And, well, Larry lived out in the Hamptons himself for a lot of the year after the mid-60s, so he probably hung out with these folks. Also, it's interesting to see the way that this painting, which is pretty flat, and I think recently sold for something like $160 million, how with Larry and Kylie working on this, they've bumped it up into a high relief, almost sculptural. And this makes me think of the priest that I helped him restore a little bit. This is titled Drugstore, 1959. And again, we've got big sweeping areas of flat color, of almost like Rothko. Some of the other people that were getting close to color field work, and then he throws in his little bits of portraiture. Also, I like the fact that he started using text, and I think ended up influencing a lot of people, not the least of which would be Jean-Michel Basquiat. This is a wonderful wall of what I would consider classic rivers. This is titled French Money, 1962 oil on canvas, 36 by 59.5 inches from a private collection. I think Larry probably did another long-lived series of paintings dealing with French money. He also did a series, I think it was the French lessons, where he was using language and names of various parts of the body. I don't know, maybe is that a picture of Napoleon? Could be. But I think it's fantastic the way that he's able to kind of brush in very lightly, very ephemerally the kind of image, and then really sharpen it up with just a few lines, charcoal, graphite. More camels. It's titled Cream Camel, 1980. So we've already seen about 20 years of camels. Well, this is an example of one of the pieces around the time that I was working for Larry. And, well, I noticed that he was buying and painting on pre-primed, oil-primed white lead canvas, and but he was painting on that with acrylic. And I always heard that it was a no-no, that theoretically the acrylic would peel off of the oil, but it still looks like it's holding together pretty well. I'm glad to see that. This is a wonderful piece. This is funky. I would bet that this one is titled Shakespeare. Oh, actually it's titled Here Lies Shakespeare, 1963. Now we'll get a chance to see Larry's straight drawing, sort of. Well, I think one of the wonderful things about a piece like this is that it really shows that Larry had a funky feel for the materials. And the way that he's combining his drafting and just the way that he lays out form. And he also was, I'm not going to say he was a great colorist, but he was a pretty good colorist. Really gets some nice things happening. But I think that there are a lot of people that look at this kind of work and think that they can fake it up. There's a whole kind of school of abject drawing, and somehow, I don't know, maybe it's the age of this. This is 1963, 45 years ago. Something about the age, maybe the patina, that just makes this come off as being more authentic somehow. So you got the young Shakespeare and the old Shakespeare. It's titled Double Nude from 1957. This is from a private collection. Well, Larry was a very passionate guy, and he had a very, how can I say, erotic streak to him. He's kind of pansexual. But we get some very nice figurative studies. You know, I've always heard that if you can't draw a hand, then you really can't draw. And Larry can sort of draw hands. At least he can make enough lines to make you see the hands. And also, there's a whole thing about his kind of the scruffy surface. He's putting the figure in, but in a lot of ways it is within an abstract expressionist background. This is another one of the three-dimensional cutout pieces. This is titled Woman Reclining in a Yellow Robe, 1997. Oil on canvas mounted on sculpted foam core, 48.5 by 39.5. And, oh gee, this has got to be 6 or 7 inches thick. Well, I know that when Larry got to this phase, doing the very three-dimensional bas-reliefs, the high reliefs, that some people thought that he'd kind of pushed too far into the sculptural end of things. And I guess certain people were also saying there was a relationship between this and somebody like Red Grooms, which I don't think is a bad thing, but a lot of people didn't think that Grooms was that serious and that Larry somehow was always more of a painter, but I kind of like these, and it's especially nice to see them here about 20 years after they were made. Okay, so this is not the French lesson. This is vocabulary lesson, Polish, 1964-65, oil on canvas, 22 by 33 inches. You can get this nice little number for 425 thou. We'll go downstairs and check out the main gallery. This is titled Dear Dale, 1973 to 82. Acrylic on canvas, 70 by 80 inches. Well, Larry was a character. He was one crazy cat, and he actually started out as a musician, a jazz musician. Played the saxophone, and I was recently reading an article. Some curator, I think, was interviewing him, and in her prefix to the article, she talked about Larry Rivers as a jazz musician, a junkie, an alcoholic, a sex addict, and a whole lot of things, and somehow Larry was able to keep it together and keep making paintings. Also, I think a piece like this kind of shows his engagement with art history, so this kind of makes me think of a Rene Magritte. And we've got more text. And then these little cartouches are actually cut out. It looks like things on board, then recessed back into the surface. This is the kind of things that David Solly and some other artists in the rediscovery of painting back in the mid-'80s started to use. It's titled O'Hare Reclining. Now, I said that Larry was an interesting and very sensual guy. I remember seeing this painting in his studio when I was working there. It's titled O'Hare, Nude in Boots, 1954, so this may be one of the oldest pieces in the show. Well, this is the great poet Frank O'Hare, and I think Larry had an on-again, off-again kind of an affair with him. They were very close friends, and Larry also loved a lot of poets and appreciated poets, and I know that Larry and Frank, I think, worked on a portfolio of illustrated poems that were printed in lithographs. This painting is 97 by 53 inches. And as I said, I would be working late at night in the studio, and I would often look over and come over and look at this painting. I think Frank O'Hare was eventually run over on a beach. It's maybe late at night. He was out reclining on a beach on Fire Island, and somebody ran over him with a Jeep. It's titled Me and My Shadow, mixed media sculpture, 81.5 by 73 by 32. And here we've got Larry working with photographs, plexiglass. I've got rivets. This is actually closer to the kind of thing that I helped him restore. This is 1970. And in certain ways, you can see there's a kind of an influence of minimalism, let's say. Let's look at this piece. It's titled Me and My Shadow 1, mixed media 78.5 by 74 by 31. You know, I think it's also kind of sad that, Larry was a very prolific, very popular, very well-known artist, showing with wonderful galleries, getting international shows. He was even included in some major traveling shows that were sponsored by the U.S. government and were sent to Eastern Europe. But somehow, since he's passed away, and I'm not sure, it's probably been 10 or 12 years ago now, his reputation has kind of fallen into obscurity, and maybe people will start to rediscover his work, some of the younger artists, and as you can see, a piece like this, it's really working in a lot of various techniques and with certain kind of approaches to media and imagery that a lot of young artists are using. It's titled Augusta, 1954, oil on canvas, 83 by 53 inches. Well, this is pretty much a straight-ahead portrait. Larry's, one of his trademarks was to do the portraits but only leave in one eye. I remember going to it was an exhibition at the Whitney Museum back in 2000, and I think they split it up into two parts. So it was the pre-1950 and the post-1950, and I went to the post-1950 party, opening party with Kate, and they had Larry's probably a portrait that was done at the same time. It was a double portrait of Birdie. And so I saw Larry a couple of weeks later, and I mentioned to him that I'd seen that painting, and I particularly said that you can look at this if you can get a reproduction online. I said, geez, Larry, I was looking at Birdie's feet in the portrait, and people were even commenting that they thought the feet were kind of strange. And then I went home to visit my mother, and she asked me to give her a foot rub, and I could see the same feet that Birdie had there with my mother. And Larry thought that was funny, and he said, yeah, he got a lot of flack. And the other thing he said is that Birdie was his mother-in-law at the time, and well, like I said, Larry, being the horn dog he was, at some point he said he would have loved to have made love to Birdie. This is another me and my shadow piece. This almost makes me think of the, I believe they were Alan Jones sculptures that appeared in Clockwork Orange. This might be about that time, 1970. It's me and my shadow too. Actually, I like the way that Larry is kind of evolving his ideas of the form, the planes, even volumetric forms that he's twisting with inside. Cubic volumes. Kind of makes me think of some of Don Judd's box progression sculptures. Well, the opening is closing down. People have gone on to other things. I just wanted to get some views of these drawings. We've got a little collage. Kind of quattrocento with a 1950s Coca-Cola ad. Another portrait. Camel's pack, and it looks like he's got some pastel, maybe deck white, maybe a little oil paint in there. This has been James Kalm reporting on Larry Rivers' reappropriations here at the TIBOR De Nagyi Gallery, 15 Rivington Street on the Lower East Side. You can leave your comments, criticisms. Just don't get nasty. And as always, thank you, Kate. Oh, thank you.